Hello YouTube, this is part 2 of a debate between myself and Robert Skynner on the validity of tithing in modern Christianity. The title of the debate, again, is Does the Bible command Christians to pay tithes today in 2015? I'm going to update the description of this and my first video with links to all the videos in this series. First of all, Robert, I've actually never heard most of the stuff you shared, and I wanted to start out by conceding that I was wrong in my use of Malachi, as well as my use of Corinthians, and I think you're right that I've misunderstood the difference between tithing and giving. I think you're also right that pastors aren't teaching about tithing the way they ought to in many churches. You've clearly studied this a lot, and I have a new respect for you. So I did a lot of my own research this week on the topic, a lot of it for the first time researching this particular topic. So I want to make this video on my original supposition, my original position, that the Old Testament law is relevant today for those of us that want to avoid sin. It's relevant in as much as it has not been revoked by something in the New Testament. The Old Testament law cannot make us righteous, and it cannot somehow increase our standing with God. But simply because it is good to avoid sin, the Old Testament law can help us to interpret what is sin and not sin. So you guys might read my mini debate with Miss Susie Pie in the comments on my first video. So Robert, I tried to find any tithes that you didn't mention, and from what I can tell, your list was more or less complete and accurate. Therefore, I'm going to go through the list, including the Melchizedek tenth and the taxes, and discuss each one in light of my own position on theonomy. For each item on the list, I'm going to discuss the purpose of the tithe, the type of offering, whether it was food or money, and the application to New Testament Christians. So first of all, the Levitical tithe, Numbers 18:21 mentions it. The purpose was it was given to the Levites because they had no inheritance. It mentions it in that passage. It was food or a tithe. I couldn't find clarity on that point exactly, but it seemed like it could be either one. It just said a tithe. So likely it was food because these other ones all seem to be food, except for the Melchizedek offering. The application I came up with was Jesus is our priest, and he is not from the tribe of Levi, so we don't have Levite priests anymore. Also, the reason the Levites received that tithe was because they had no inheritance in the land. Now, Psalm 2:8 has God telling Jesus, "Ask of me, and I will give you the nations as an inheritance." We can see that Jesus asked because of the Great Commission. Jesus said, "All authority in heaven and earth has been given to me." But the point is that Jesus does have an inheritance. And that's among some other supporting verses I found, but I picked those two. The takeaway from this is that the Levitical tithe is not applicable for Christians today in the New Covenant. Second one, festival tithe. This one is mentioned in Deuteronomy 14:22. The purpose seems to be a celebration before the Lord, and the type is food. The application, I found, if Calvin and the Westminster Confession of Faith have anything to say about this, then Jewish holidays fall under Colossians 2:17, which call them shadows of things to come, and therefore they're not binding for us today. One of my sources said that the Galatians celebrated Jewish holidays because they thought the holidays would somehow increase their standing with God. The Galatians were clearly mistaken about this. I would say there's nothing wrong with celebrating the Jewish holidays, in and of the celebration itself. But if it subtracts from our reliance on the atonement of Jesus Christ, then celebrating could even be called sinful. Now, the poor tithe is up next. So festival tithe, not applicable for Christians in the New Covenant. Poor tithe, that's Deuteronomy 14:28. The purpose was seems to be charity. The type is food, and the application. This seems to be a celebration of sorts. Now, Robert, you're going to have to correct me on this. I'm not really sure what the purpose was, if not for charity alone. So I'm going to lump this in with holidays and feasts. As I discussed before in Colossians, this would be a shadow of things to come. However, I want to note that charity is a clear theme throughout the Bible, and even though charity is not a requisite for salvation, I do believe that charity is an important practice for believers today. So, not applicable for us today. Up next, the tithe of the tithe, with the Hebrew name that I'm not going to try and pronounce. Numbers 18:26 mentions it. The purpose was it was given to the priests, the inner temple priests, by the outer temple priests. It was a tenth of the tithe given to the Levites. The type seems to be food, or whatever was received as a part of the Levitical tithe. And the application, this one was a little bit more difficult for me. I think the easiest way to deal with it is to say that it falls under the category of things which are no longer applicable to us because it deals with Levitical priests. However, just for my curiosity, I was thinking one might try to make an argument using 1 Peter 2:9, which says you are a royal priesthood, talking about the Gentiles. And then also Revelation says that we're a kingdom of priests. So then you might say that our high priest, or our inner temple priest, is Jesus, and Jesus said, whatever we give to the least of these we have given to him. So someone might also try to make this argument using the Aaronic offering from Numbers 18:28, and then try to say that Jesus is analogous to Aaron somehow. But I think that while some sort of argument might be able to be made in this way, it's too speculative for me to draw a hard line on this point. So I just haven't researched it well enough, and I think it's pretty safe to say that this offering doesn't apply to believers in the New Covenant. Up next, the Melchizedek tenth, or the Melchizedek offering, Genesis 14:20. It seems to be just like an act of worship, or well, no, it wouldn't be a tax. It was an act of worship. It was a gift of just a tenth of everything, so it probably included food and wealth. The application, after Melchizedek blessed Abraham, we see Abraham and only Abraham gave a tenth of everything he had to Melchizedek. Melchizedek asks him for persons instead of wealth, but Abraham refuses. I've heard before that Melchizedek's request for people is significant because of the many times God in the OT tells the Jews that he wants their hearts and not their offerings, which is basically the gospel in a nutshell. Jesus is called a priest after the order of Melchizedek because he's a king and a priest, but it's significant that he also desires people and not wealth. Now, the monetary offering Abraham gives to Melchizedek cannot be applied to us in the New Testament by any reasonable stretch of the text as a commandment to tithe. It just doesn't say anything that can be construed that way. We would have to add words to the text for that. So, last one, taxes. The purpose seems to be supporting the government. The type is wealth, and the application, Jesus told us, give to Caesar what is Caesar's. This doesn't have anything to do with tithing as it pertains to this discussion, but my personal conviction is that as long as the government isn't anti-Christian and evil, there's no reason to say that we shouldn't pay our taxes. I think we should pay our taxes. So the conclusion after all this is I've looked at the tithes that I could find, and which were basically all the ones that you mentioned, Robert, and I think that none of them are applicable under the New Covenant. I do want to point out that giving to the church as an act of worship, if it is done in right motivation with Jesus' sacrifice at the center of our theology, is a good thing. Now, with that, I concede the debate to Robert Skynner. However, I would finally request that Robert give one more video critiquing my analysis of the relationship between these tithes and the New Testament. So, that's all I've got for today. I went a little bit under time, so I hope that makes up for going overtime last time. And I do really appreciate Robert's invitation to this debate. I feel like I've learned a lot. Thank you, and I'm out.